Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the sixth and last webinar in SCRA's Tech Transfer Tuesday webinar series. I'm Janine Brigman-Rogers, Program Manager at SCRA. My role is in the Academic Innovations Group, where we work closely with institutions of higher education across the state, offering support in your goals of use-inspired R&D, technology development, and industry engagement. If you missed any of our previous 5 sessions, you would like to share them with a colleague, or you'd like to have a refresher, you can access all of the recordings at scra.org/T3. If you have a question during the presentation, feel free to pop that in the chat. We want this to be an open, informal discussion where you're free to ask questions. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A if you prefer to hold them until then. Today, we have Tyler Tatum and Kyle Salazar of 3-Phase SC giving us an overview of this free program supported by the SC Department of Commerce to help SC-based small businesses, including university startups, secure SBIR, STTR funding. The assistance 3-Phase provides to companies ranges from SAM.gov registration, drafting proposals, budgets, and final submission. And this is all at no cost to founders. But before we dive in with Tyler and Kyle, I'd first like to bring in Julie Kunkel, who's the Deputy Director in the Business Services Division at the South Carolina Department of Commerce. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself and how your office supports startups across the state, like sponsoring the 3-Phase SC program? And then after that, they can kick it off.
Sure. Thanks, Janine. It is good to be here today. I appreciate the invite. So as Janine mentioned, I'm Julie Kunkel. I'm a Deputy Director within Business Services here at the South Carolina Department of Commerce. Specifically, I have 2 teams, both innovation and small business. The innovation side is really the team that works most closely with the 3-Phase team. Before I give you a little bit of information on 3-Phase, I just want to paint a bit of a picture. Here at Commerce, what our teams are really looking to do is to create the right environment to make it so that innovation and commercialization and entrepreneurship can establish and grow here in South Carolina. One of the ways that we do that is we fund initiatives, and 3-Phase is one of those, as Janine mentioned earlier. It is a completely free service to South Carolina-based small and medium-sized businesses that are conducting really research and development. We started it back in 2019. We recognized that there was an opportunity to provide some critical support with SBIR, STTR, which is Small Business Innovation Research, and Small Business Technology Transfer. That funding from the federal government is grants, so it's equity-free, and of course, who doesn't need funding and who doesn't love equity-free funding. But basically, the opportunity that we saw is that throughout South Carolina, we could help defray the cost of working with people like Kyle and Tyler, trying to basically make it easier for our companies to secure this type of funding. A couple of things that you might want to know about 3-Phase. So far, since 2019, they have helped secure 61 total awards from the federal government, which is a nice number, and that equated to over $51 million in SBIR STTR funding. The other thing I noticed yesterday is that before 2019, before 3-Phase started, the program with the federal government was around, but once we started 3-Phase, we saw a nice uptick both in dollars being secured and number of awards coming from the federal government coming to South Carolina. And we saw roughly doubling of total dollars from post-2019 versus pre-2019. So these guys are doing a really, really good job really helping our state's small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses secure these awards. The other thing I wanted to point out is that with the 3-Phase team, while of course we're always interested in making things easier and creating opportunities for the environment right for innovation and new businesses to start and grow, is we find it being part of Three Phase and working with Three Phase, they connect out to a lot of our other resources in the state. So they are fully aware of the entrepreneur support organizations that exist. They know a lot of researchers throughout all of our colleges and universities, some of yours. And of course, they certainly know SCRA and SCRA's matching grant program, as well as lots of other opportunities. So I just want to make sure that you all know that Three Phase is not just part of providing free, support in developing these great applications, but they are a great resource asset. So hopefully you'll find today insightful. I encourage you to not let this be the last conversation you have. Reach out to Kyle and Tyler, and help make your efforts easier and create opportunities for yourselves. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Kyle or Tyler, whoever's going to speak first.
Alrighty, I'll jump in. And I'll go ahead and share my presentation here. Make sure I get the right screen. Thanks for joining us today. And I think, Julie, that was a great intro to, the program as a whole. I'm going to take you through a brief kind of overview of not just the program, but mostly focus on SBIRs, STTRs, what they are, how they help you, and what the different agencies are that tend to fund these. And so I will jump in. Just by the way, and it should be pretty easy to find us, but if you want help, you can always go to threephasesc.com. There's a Start Now button. You can go and apply for support, but you can also reach out to us directly. So we try to be very accessible. The program as a whole, as of today, is about $2.5 billion a year in funding. There's 11 different agencies that give out the funding. It is a percentage of the overall R&D budget. So we'll see where that ends up, as the year progresses. But at the end of the day, it does seem like the federal government wants to continue and protect this program because it's a critical part of the technology innovation infrastructure in the U.S. Most things that you know and use today have their roots in SBIR funding. As Julie mentioned, it's equity-free funding. And ideally, if you use it right, you use this to line up either from customers and or investors, outside investment so that you can bridge between, having kind of like being at a high risk state and not having a product to getting to the point where you have enough of a product or an MVP that other people will put money into you. So that's really the goal of the program. I always like to put this slide out here because I think it helps everyone appreciate where the SBIR funding tends to sit in terms of other pots of money, other people involved. Usually at the early stages, you get things coming out of either universities or they come out of, an innovator who has an idea, they have a concept, they've maybe done some thinking on it, probably put a patent in, maybe done some tinkering. And the key is now, how do I get this, idea slash initial innovation to a point where a customer could use it? And so really this funding helps bridge between that, early stage to where you have a product that you could actually put in the hands of a customer, and have them use it. And in that context, that tends to open up doors to angel investors, VCs, and ideally customers. It's really important, if you look at this red line here, to realize that even though we think our innovations are great, and I say we because I'm, an entrepreneur since I left college, I've I have been on that side of the fence many, many times. Like, we think our innovation's great and it's going to solve all the world's problems, but before you have customers, before you have decent market traction, you are high risk in the minds of the people that you're trying to get money from. And it's better to own that early than to think that everyone should just accept that your product is going to solve all their problems from day one. So the key again is that you leverage this pot of research and development dollars to de-risk your technology to the point where you aren't a big risk to people. And as you do that, your value goes up and you're able to, attract investment, attract customers. So I think this is just a good visual to think about as you move towards pursuing SBIRs and in particular bringing your product to market. So we provide one-on-one proposal support. There's a lot of things we help with. I tend to kind of lump them into, I would say two categories. One is operationally. Our goal is to minimize the time you have to spend on understanding all the little, ins and outs of getting a proposal together that is compliant with the RFP that the federal government puts out. So, everything from the online applications to registrations, all of that stuff you can get very bogged down in because there's, even just resetting passwords could probably take you, an hour or two if you don't know what you're doing. So our goal is to really limit the amount of time that you spend on all those little operational details. The second most important thing, though, is we do a lot around building your story and making your story appropriate for the agency that you're targeting. I'll get into every agency's different, and it's important to, appreciate that fact. And a lot of what we're doing is helping draw out the best points of your technology, your team, and your market opportunity, making sure those are portrayed well and portrayed in the context of the agency that you're going after and what they want to fund. So, eligibility, it's got to be a for-profit small business. Less than 500 employees is the definition of a small business. So I think more than likely everyone on the Zoom call today is probably in that category. Independently owned and operated primarily in the US. Sometimes we find that can be a little bit of an issue. If you're doing an SBIR, the PI or principal investigator has to be 51% employed by the small business. If you're doing an STTR with every agency but NSF, the PI can be either employed by the small business or the research institution. NSF requires either STTR or SBIR. The PI has to be 51% employed by the small business regardless. So 51% owned and controlled by one or more individuals in the US. So this, again, sometimes can be an issue, but most of the times it's not. And then the research must be conducted in the US. So they want the money spent on US entities in the US. And we do run into that as a problem sometimes when people want to offshore, animal work or engineering. So that's something that we could discuss. Here's all the different agencies that fund SBIRs and STTRs. So some groups don't fund STTRs. Those are the ones on the right. And many of the groups fund both SBIRs and STTRs. The ones with a star next to them fund both medical related technologies. We have a lot of medical related technologies that go after, for example, like National Science Foundation, as well as go after Human Health Services or National Institute of Health. DoD does fund medical technologies as well, but they're kind of particular in terms of you have to have a topic available that fits your technology. So we don't see as much stuff going after Department of Defense on the health side. And then the one that's kind of unique is Department of Agriculture or USDA. They do fund medical technologies through a specific topic call that's related to rural communities. So they fund technologies that are specifically supporting and helping rural communities. So sometimes they'll fund things like telehealth, but it's got to be a problem that is unique to rural communities and does not apply to urban. So that's kind of the catch there. I just put, a quick overview of the deadlines. Some agencies have deadlines throughout the year. Department of Defense has topics all year long. They're constantly coming out, but if you find a topic that fits your technology, you got to jump on it because that topic may not come out again. That's the challenge with Department of Defense. NIH is an open call. Their deadlines are 3 times a year. Anything health related pretty much can fit under NIH. There are some special calls for NIH that pop up here or there. Those have different deadlines often. So if you see one, bring it to us and we'll chase it down with you. National Science Foundation, they actually they change about every 3 months. They have a different way they operate. So it's a continuous thing keeping up. But they have what's called a pitch project that you submit first. It's about 2.5 pages. That you can submit any time of the year. And then there are 3 windows of submission that they have. The main catch there is if your pitch project is accepted, you have 2 windows to submit your final proposal, which equates to probably about 7 months. A lot of the other agencies have either one or, some have 2 calls, like Department of Energy. Department of Energy has 2 calls, but each call has different topics. So again, if you find one that works, you got to jump on it. And a lot of the other smaller agencies are just once a year. So anyway, fundability. So it's important to realize that the SBIR program doesn't tend to fund things that are more innovative business ideas versus innovative technologies. It's important to kind of realize that difference. So if you come up with a great new, website-based business that's really cool and unique, it doesn't mean that it's SBIR fundable because there may not be any new tech development involved. And, we're happy to talk through that for anyone's, specific needs, but at the end of the day, that's just an important distinction between SBIR funding and, other types of money. I always say that the good news in that is if you're not SBIR fundable, there's a lot of times where it means you can get to market faster than a lot of the companies that we do work with. So, because the tech's probably readily available and you just got to bolt it together and go. But regardless, that's something we have to consider. There's got to be a product market fit there. Some agencies like NASA or Department of Defense, the product market fit may be whether the government's going to buy it or not. So in some situations, the government is the customer, but there's definitely got to be a market opportunity for the technology. And then, it's got to fit with the agency's needs. And that's where we come in to kind of help you figure that out. But there are definitely technologies that don't fit any of the agencies. Credible team is something we work with people a lot on. And the team issue could either be related to not having the right technical players involved. For example, we get people who maybe have a patent, they've, done some tinkering, but at the end of the day, they don't have a solid technical team that can help them evaluate the technology or move it to the next level. And in a lot of cases like that, we try to talk through and help them either realize who they need to partner with or help them find the partners either in academia or otherwise. We also see the other side of it where it's, you know, one person in academia has come up with a concept, but there's not someone who can sit in the company yet and actually move the company forward. And we're going the other direction of trying to kind of see who could be there to build out that side of the team. But having a team can be definitely important. I like to put this slide up because it helps people appreciate if you've come from the academic world or you understand the academic world and the grants there. SBIRs are different in one key way. Excuse me, but the basic concept is in academia and in a lot of the standard research grants, you're what I call expanding the funnel. So you're kind of exploring new ideas, you're exploring new concepts, you're trying to expand the horizon of the current knowledge and science and create understanding in new areas is maybe a way to put it, which is great. But when you get to SBIR, STTR, you are shifting to taking that current understanding and culling it down, decreasing the funnel down to a product that a customer will buy, a minimum viable product. So in academia, you may be exploring, coming up with ideas, testing whether they work, et cetera, et cetera. In SBIR, STTRs, you were saying, okay, I think I know what I need to build. Here are the key things I need to prove, to make sure that I can prove that I can build this. Let's go test those things, those technical hurdles, and eliminate them down to the point where we have a product we can deliver to market. So I see sometimes teams try to introduce things that are more exploratory in SBIR grants. And oftentimes the reviewers kind of beat up on you about that. So it's an important thing to realize. So the progression. Phase one, and it totally depends on the agency, but budget caps vary between some budgets can be as low as 150 or 200K in a phase one. Most are between 6 and 12 months. Some phase ones can go up to 400 or 500K for National Institute of Health, but it's kind of in that range. Your goal there is it feasible to like build a product that addresses this market need? And so there may be questions of scalability, there may be questions of needing to operate under certain parameters. There may be a question of, can I build it at a certain size? You want to think about the things the market says they have to have in your product and go test those key things in a phase one to make sure that you're not wasting everyone's time and money to proceed forward. So ideally, you want to overcome those major questions regarding, can you build a product the market wants in a phase one to at least know you're headed down the right direction. And then phase two is more like 12 to 24 months. It can be anywhere from 500K on up to 2 million, depending on the agency. And your goal is to, again, move towards a minimum viable product and get as far down that R&D path as possible. There are things like phase 2Bs, that often expect a match, a one-to-one private match. And by the way, we can, get into it if you get to that point, but there is certain matching funds available even within South Carolina to help out with that. But the basic idea is that, phase 2B means that you are getting very close to market and you just need a little more money to be able to bridge between, what you did in phase 2 and getting a market ready product. Those can be big budgets. Some groups like Department of Defense and National Institute of Health can put up to 3-4 million on the table for that. So there are both grants and contracts. I won't get into a lot of details there, but usually when it's a contract, it's something the government is saying, here's exactly what I need. Go build it for me. With grants, it's usually more open-ended, like, tell me the problem, tell me the solution, tell me what you're going to do, and I'll evaluate that and give you the money to go do it. But that's the basic idea there. So SBIR versus STTR, I'm just going to go into this, quickly, but there's a bigger pot of money for SBIRs. There are a couple of limitations in terms of subawarding under the SBIR program that are important to consider. In a phase 1, you can only subaward a third of the grant. In a phase 2, you can subaward up to half. So in a phase 2, you have more money and more money that you can pass around to partners. The PI in an SBIR has to be with the small business 51% of their time. That means that they can't have employment commitments elsewhere for more than 50% of their time. So sometimes you have to look at that counter. It doesn't mean that they have to be paid 51% under the grant, but they just can't have more than half their time committed elsewhere. An STTR, again, the PI can either be 51% employed by the small business or the partnering university. And that can be a big advantage, especially in National Institute of Health grants, where the reviewers are very picky about who's on the team and who has publications and all those sort of things. The pot of money is a lot smaller for STTR. You can see it's 0.45% set aside of the federal budget or federal R&D budget versus 3.2%. At the end of the day, though, we tend to say, like, in a phase 1 in particular, look at what fits you best. It's just important to realize that distinction, because even though the pot of money is smaller, there are less people who go after STTRs, so the funding rate may be about the same. So again, like, why would you choose an STTR? Sometimes it's a principal investigator issue. Sometimes it's the fact that in an STTR, the research institution has to do at least 30% of the work, but they can do as much as 59% of the work. So if you need to subaward out a big chunk of the grant, an STTR might be a better fit for you. Use of facilities is kind of along those same lines. Like, if you really need that subaward partner to do a lot of work, then that might be the way to go. Every agency looks at the world a little bit differently. NSF, I always like to say that, and I'll contrast NSF and NIH real quick, in health technologies, for example, but in general as well. NSF is more about funding stuff earlier. They want to take high risk, and get high rewards. They want to fund game-changing technologies that are going to be a leap forward both in technology, and they're going to revolutionize the market. NIH on the other, and I always say they're about funding the creation of the technology. NIH on the other hand, National Institute of Health, they tend to want to have better preliminary data. They want to have a good foundation for what you've done so far. they tend to, the things they tend to fund are more about evaluating the technology. So like I figured out that this compound has a potential to cure this or, support this particular disease. Now I want to go into animal trials and I have the data to back up the fact that I can go into animal trials to identify, to get true efficacy and or safety. So it's just a kind of a key distinction. DoD is mostly about DoD problems. So with DoD and NSF, they tend to both um, essentially allow the program managers to have a lot of say over who gets funded. Um, their scoring, like NSF will score you from poor to very good, which is kind of a vague scoring, and that's on purpose. So they have a lot of flexibility in saying, well, you got very good from two reviewers and good from another, so I'll fund you. But there's not a true score backing that. And DoD is just like, yeah, I liked you, I want to fund you. It's very program manager driven. Um, in both cases, there may be outside, and NSF definitely uses outside reviewers. I think DoD, it's almost optional whether they use outside reviewers. So NIH, on the other hand, the review panels are independent of the program manager. They give you a score, and it's actually 10 to 90. I should put a 1 there. But 10 is the best score. 90 is, a worse score, the worst score you can get. Usually, if you're above a 50, they actually just don't score you. You will still get three reviewers to score your proposal, but they won't give you a summative score. And fundable proposals are usually in that 30 or less range. But it's all about how that review panel thinks. There's some flexibility the program managers may have if you're on the fence to get you funded, but if you don't score well, you're kind of out of the game with NIH. So the DoD game too, the thing to mention there, it's all about procurement. They're looking at their problems. They're looking at the systems they need. They're looking at how they're going to buy those systems. You need to be able to dive in if you really want to leverage this funding and sell to Department of Defense. You need to really understand how they operate, what their needs are, and how to kind of move up that chain of command and get your technology positioned with the right players under the right system, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just really important to realize you're stepping into a different world than the commercial world, and you have to speak their language. You have to understand what prime contractors are managing the system that you want to be a part of, and essentially play by their rules. And I'm happy to discuss that in more detail offline, but I've had more experience than I ever intended to have in my life playing in that space. So, but it is a different world. Um, this just shows kind of high risk, high reward. NIH, DoD are probably more on the low risk side. I would say that NSF is probably one of the higher risk agencies. There are some spinoffs of health and also of energy and even of DoD that are the higher risk, and those are DARPA. You guys, I'm sure everyone's heard of DARPA, but there are energy and health equivalents. There's ARPA-H and there's ARPA-E. And those are the more high risk side of those agencies. And, we can talk about those in more detail if you're interested. But most of the people we work with are more on this side of DoD and NIH. And again, you just got to think in terms of proving your case in a way that there's a perceivable step forward where NSF is going to take more risk. Oh, sorry. I think that's all I had for today. I didn't want to, you know, overwhelm you at this early stage. I wanted to make sure to give you enough information to understand the program, understand what we do, and figure out if it's worth a conversation. I do want to emphasize that Kyle and I are here to have that conversation. You don't have to, we want to give you an idea of whether you might fit, but we're happy to have that discussion to really figure out if you do fit. That's what we're here for. So please do reach out if you feel like we should have that conversation. Kyle, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think one of the ties to make here, specifically knowing that this call is talking about the kind of tech transfer side of the world for universities and colleges around South Carolina, is what is that next step? A lot of times we work with the three research universities pretty closely, and faculty from all of them. We've also worked with several faculty members and spin out companies that have come from the primarily undergraduate institutions as well. One of the common features we see is that folks at all of the universities in South Carolina get basic like benchtop research grants from a lot of these agencies already. And then that funding runs out, and what's the next step, right? The next step, this is a very easily viable next step for a lot of companies, and the pathway that we see taken a great deal of the time. It's often hard to go back to those agencies after they fund the bench science and say, okay, we think we may have found a compound that could treat X indication in cancer. And they're like, oh, that's great for you. We don't have a mechanism for that. We'd like to continue funding exploration of other compounds for other indications, right? So this is that vehicle tie. And part of what we get really excited about is helping figure out, is the science there? Do you have enough underlying data? Do you need to go search for additional funding to get some of that underlying data? What does the startup company world look like? We can plug folks into other resources around the ecosystem, as Julie mentioned, to talk about setting up an LLC, articles of incorporation, what it looks like to actually form the company to go and pursue these dollars. So I know Tyler and I both get really excited about talking about university spin out technology, and how we can help around the state de-risk it and move towards commercialization.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. I guess, Janine, did we want to jump in with questions and things?
Yes, yes, it's a great time for questions. Kelsey, do we have any questions on deck?
I don't see any questions on deck so far, but feel free
Okay.
to ask questions or raise your hand, anyone from the audience.
Yes, if anyone has questions, raise your hand, unmute yourself so that you can ask. In the meantime, I have a couple to get the ball rolling. One is you get to work with many researchers turned entrepreneur on their first SBIR, STTR proposal. For those on the call that may want to pursue a similar path, how would you describe the difference between preparing for a federal research grant through the university versus an SBIR, STTR grant as a startup?
No, that's good. Do you want to jump in, Kyle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's often one of the hardest transitions to ask researchers to make, and that I think is where I personally get really excited, because we're no longer talking about, to Tyler's earlier slide, right? We're not talking about discovery. We're talking about productization. We're talking about commercialization. We're talking about how you can advance the science and de-risk it in such a way that you can productize it and make money on it and get it into market to do the good things that you're trying to solve those problems with. But those are really, really different skill sets. It becomes much more important to talk about, we often refer to it as kind of science fiction writing, because we're talking about the commercialization plan, right? And nobody really knows what it's going to look like until you get to market. But you have to do a good job of convincing, no matter what agency you're looking at, you've got to do a great job of convincing those reviewers that you know what you're talking about, your team knows what you're talking about, and you're going to figure out how to sell it, because that's what they want to fund. And that's a very different mindset from talking about the underlying scientific data that got you to that initial discovery to begin with. And that's one of the areas that we spend a fair amount of time, is kicking the tires and laying out different business stories and poking holes, which is one of the more fun aspects of, I think, how we get to spend our time, is understanding a lot of really deep scientific technology and then saying, yeah, but like, what's the market there, right? Like, how are you going to sell that? It's really cool, but now we got to sell it. So we get to help kind of pin all of that together into a sellable story. Good question, Janine.
Sure. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
I see Tava, you have a question. If you want to, you can come off camera and ask it.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you, Tyler. Always great to listen to your talks. And question is that the funds use, you had to you kind of mentioned that all the funds has to be used in the United States. Am I right? Or can we kind of sub over to somewhere else so that they can get the work done?
You can subaward, but the subaward has to be spent in the US. So that does sometimes become a problem depending on the group that we're working with. So that is an important thing to realize with this money is that it's taxpayer dollars, so they want it to be spent in the US on, US taxpayers basically. So sometimes that can be limiting because sometimes it's more expensive to do it in the US or what have you, but it is a limitation.
Thank you.
Good. Do we have anyone else that has questions? If not, I have one more I'd like to ask. What would you say are the most common areas of weakness on an SBIR STTR proposal for an academic startup? And how would you help them fill in those gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I wanted to extend what Kyle was saying earlier that with some examples, but usually you kind of have like an idea, you have a concept, it's come from a certain point of view that may be like limited to a certain area. And a lot of what we have to do, like Kyle said, is kind of back up and say, like, is that really your customer segment? Is that really your value proposition? Is there more there that you don't realize in terms of, value and value delivery? One of the ones that I feel like is a good example is we were working on a coating that goes on the bottom of boats way back when. And originally the group came to us and said, this is this is really more environmentally friendly. And so that was like the main push initially. And with most environmentally friendly technologies, there is actually a really good value proposition. And the environmental side of it is great, but it becomes a secondary value prop. And in this case, through multiple conversations, it all of a sudden popped out that when you use this paint on the bottom of a boat, there is a 5% or so increase in fuel efficiency. And if you think about boats and you know anything about boats, they use a ton of fuel compared to cars. Like it's like, sometimes gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. And so if you're talking 5%, that can be tremendous, right? And it was like they didn't even think of that value prop until we talked about it. And another example with coating is a group that was going to use a soybean oil base instead of water base, or the toxic, like typical oil base. And at the end of the day, what we figured out there was like, yes, it's more environmentally friendly, but the key differentiator is you create a paint that acts like oil-based paint, but it's this environmentally friendly and non-toxic as, water-based paint, right? Low VOC, all that stuff. And even there, beyond the environmental benefits, there are many other benefits such as, even the manufacturing of things that are less toxic can be cheaper because you're not having to have people in hazmat suits to do it anymore, right? Environmentally friendly coatings also, when you apply them, like the more toxic stuff, you got to wear hazmat suits and there's all this potential insurance and just the cost of applying it is way higher. And so if you can limit that, you can eliminate a lot of those complications, you have a better product that's cheaper. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, I think
making
so.
that
Yes, it
shift
does.
is,
Yes,
I
thank
think
you.
before I see Steve there with a question. I wanted to add a little bit to your earlier question too, Janine, about what we see weaknesses. They're pretty common weaknesses on the proposals. One of the areas, it kind of depends on which route folks come in. We typically either have entrepreneurs that are in the community developing an idea or the academic researcher side. And both of those typically come in with different weaknesses. On the academic side, it's usually the business company perspective, storytelling around the value proposition to Tyler's earlier conversation points. On the other side, with the entrepreneurial folks, it's typically the research backing. And so we're usually looking at making those
yeah.
partnerships in either direction based on what group comes in and where they sit in the spectrum. Most of these agencies expect to see some academic rigor in their review process. So you need someone on your application with a CV that can back up what you say you're going to do. They need a PhD and the credentials to show proof in the market that they can do it. Or you have that and you need somebody who can come in and say that they can sell something, say that they've shown commercialization expertise in the future or in the past, and that your team can effectively move that work forward with this funding.
That's great. Thank you. Steve, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, and this can be for either Tyler or Kyle. Obviously, over the last 6 weeks, there's been quite a bit of uncertainty and mixed signals about budgets and grants from the agencies, the federal agencies, and cuts, and then cuts were put back in. So, how do you pull out your crystal balls? And how do you see this going? And when do you see kind of a firmer atmosphere being created so that everyone can plan better?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my answer and like Kyle jump in too, but I don't know that anyone has a good crystal ball right now, because it's just every day there's something new that, we're trying to navigate, figure out. It does seem like SBIRs, STTRs will be a priority, but again, they're a percentage of the overall federal budget, R&D budget. So if they whack the overall federal R&D budget, then, they're indirectly whacking the SBIR program. But it's really hard to kind of like, say exactly what to predict at this point, but we do feel like we're seeing some stability in the programs. I will also say that if the SBIR program tends to crash and burn, that we're all going to have much bigger problems. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
That's a good
my
answer.
thoughts on it.
I think the other kind of supplemental thing is that this program, these set of programs have been around since the late 80s, early 90s, and they have long had bipartisan support. So I think what we'll see and what we're probably seeing through the Innovate Act that's come out recently and kind of the policy discussions in DC are there's going to be some tweaking, there's going to be some optimization, and for years I think a lot of these programs have had the ability to create pilots or to create other activities or streamline their operations and kind of function differently. And I think what we may see is some standardization across the programs or some opportunities to take what's worked in some smaller agencies and take it to the bigger agencies and really shift the way the programs work. I'm hopeful that they will stay around because they're excellent programs. I think everyone on all sides agrees that funding small business development in the U.S. is really important to getting us to energy independence, getting us to national security standpoints. I mean, I think we'll continue to enjoy the bipartisan support there for these programs.
Thank you.
Kyle, I fully agree. Thank you for that additional input. We do have one more question that came through on the Q&A chat. This question is from someone who's attending anonymously. Could you reiterate what you mentioned about technologies that need funding for initial animal trials?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think, roll back and think about that, but basically, when it comes to like a lot of times, um, and I'll just usually animal trials or National Institute of Health related, right? So, um, a lot of times people have initially done some homework and either figured out that they have, you know, a small set of compounds that could be turned into a therapeutic. They have and they kind of know that it looks like it works in a certain indication under some, maybe they've done some initial animal trials or they've done cell work, et cetera, et cetera. For med devices, maybe they've like, you know, actually, you know, developed a concept and done some benchtop testing. And what we see is through phase one and eventually sometimes even in phase through two, it becomes all about, you know, regulatory approval, which is a lot to do with like you know, showing efficacy and showing safety. And so in a phase one, a lot of times you're doing some level of efficacy, you know, proving it works for the indication you say it works for phase one. And then phase two can be either a bigger efficacy study, or you get into some of the more expensive safety animal trials for therapeutics. You know, for med devices, a lot of times you're um, you're dealing with like more large animals, you know, in a phase two where you're testing a device on, you know, pigs or, you know, what have you. But at the end of the day, that's kind of how things transition. You move from like kind of discovery and it looks like I got something that might work to like safety and efficacy that will allow you to get your human trials going. I think that answers the question, but hopefully that helps.
And just an
Okay,
offer
I
that
don't see
if
it. Go ahead.
sorry, if you want to talk more about it independently in your specific situation, please email us. We're happy to jump on a call and talk about where you are and where you're headed and what might be helpful.
Yeah, because it's unique for each technology and where they start a lot of times. Um,
Okay, I got a little notice that it did answer the question, so thank you. I think that's a great point. The one thing I love about your program is that you're so accessible and you're willing to answer any question. So I think it goes without saying that if anyone has, as they're thinking about today's session, if anyone has further questions, that they can reach out directly to Tyler and Kyle and get their questions answered. Well, with that, I'll close down today's session. Thank you, Tyler, Kyle, Julie, and everyone who joined us today. We hope
Thank
you
you,
enjoyed,
everyone.
yeah, we hope you enjoyed this series, and we look forward for other ways to support your institution to promote technology development. This was our final webinar in this particular series. So if you want to refresh on any ones that we've done before, please visit our website at sera.org/T3. And thank you again, and have a great afternoon.